Good afternoon and welcome to this Conservation Applied Research and Development or CARD webinar on the Conservation Improvement Program opportunities in the commercial and industrial refrigeration market. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Mary Sue Lobenstein, the R&D Program Administrator at the Minnesota Department of Commerce, Division of Energy Resources. And with me today is Laura Silver, who is the Senior State Program Administrator at the department, where she reviews Utility Conservation Improvement Program triennial plans and annual status reports. Laura will be moderating the Q&A portion of our webinar today. Our presenters today are Russ Landry from the Center for Energy and Environment, Steve Mulqueen from Cascade Energy, Melanie Lord from Slipstream, and Jim Kelsey from KW Engineering. Russ Landry is a senior mechanical engineer at the Center for Energy and Environment, where he has worked on energy efficiency in buildings for over 31 years. This work has included evaluating more than 50 ice arenas for energy-saving improvements and supporting utility programs for commercial and industrial refrigeration system energy savings. At Cascade Energy, Steve Mulqueen works as an energy engineer where he helps large industrial end users reduce electrical energy use. Steve has worked extensively with utilities and industrial end users in the Pacific Northwest, implementing custom programs and strategic energy management programs. And he's currently working with Xcel Energy's industrial customers to achieve energy and demand savings. Melanie Lord manages field research projects and conducts market research supporting Slipstream's research initiatives. Her research expertise includes in-depth knowledge of secondary energy information and data sources. Currently, she is working on projects measuring consumer acceptance of heat pump closed dryers and characterizing the market for variable refrigerant flow systems in the Midwest. Jim Kelsey founded KW Engineering in 1998 to find innovative ways to save energy in buildings. Jim has developed tools to model commercial refrigeration systems and psychometrics, and he chaired the development of ASHRAE Standard 211, an energy audit on energy audits for commercial buildings. Currently, he's working on ways to make commissioning grocery stores cheaper and faster, and is researching market trends in low global warming potential refrigerants. We're pleased to have this very experienced team of researchers here today for our webinar. Before we start, I'll go over a few webinar basics, which should be familiar to most of you. All attendees are in listen-only mode. We'll answer all questions at the end of the presentation, but as questions occur to you, send them to all panelists via the Q&A panel. We'll do our best to answer all questions within the time allocated, but if we don't get to some, we'll answer them after the webinar. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on the department's website. The slide set from this webinar will also be available. Just for some context, this webinar is one in an ongoing series designed to summarize results from research projects that are funded by Minnesota's Applied Research and Development Fund, which was established in the Next Generation Energy Act of 2007. The purpose of that fund is to help Minnesota utilities achieve their energy savings goal. $2.6 million is set aside annually for the CARD program, which awards research grants in a competitive request for proposal process. Results from CARD projects provide utilities with data to enhance energy efficiency program designs within their SIP portfolios. As you can see by the pie chart, CARD projects funded to date have been in all building sectors, as well as some that cross multiple sectors. The subject of today's webinar addresses the commercial and industrial sectors and discusses barriers and opportunities for utility-driven refrigeration efficiency. Today, we're ready to turn it over to Russ, who will start today's presentation.
Thank you, Mary Sue. I appreciate the interest of all of you that are joining the webinar today. First of all, just to orient you to who will be talking about what today, I'm Russ Landry with CE. I was the lead for this project. I'm going to start off with a brief introduction to the project. After that, hand it over to Melanie Lord from Slipstream, who will talk about utility programs and facility and construction activity data that we looked at. And after that, we'll jump into results by the specific sectors that we looked at, starting with Jim Kelsey from KW Engineering, going over the grocery store results. Then Steve Mulqueen from Cascade Energy will talk about the industrial refrigeration sector results, and that includes cold storage and food processing facilities. Then I'll circle back to me again to talk about the results for ice rinks, and then I'll end with a summary and discussion of the program recommendations that we provided. Just to give you a little context on the project, why we conducted a statewide study at this time. We saw that there was value because the SIP programs addressing refrigeration within Minnesota have been getting relatively small savings compared to the potential that was identified in a recent potential study. There have also been a lot of changes to the market regarding refrigerants and other technologies that provide some opportunities and concerns for those in the industry. And we also wanted to make sure that programs took into account local factors, including what the climate effect in Minnesota and also what the local market conditions and the fact that Minnesota has a number of ice arenas that most states do not. And the overall goal of the project was to gather information that would help programs within Minnesota increase the savings that they're realizing in this sector. And in particular, we wanted to look at measures that weren't already being addressed effectively by the programs that have been in place in Minnesota. So we were looking at new measures and also looking at new program approaches to try to increase the market penetration for existing programs. And within the sector, just to make clear, we focused on large refrigeration-dominated facilities that included grocery stores, industrial refrigeration, such as food processing and cold storage, and ice arenas. We specifically did not include beverage bottling as part of this, nor did we include convenience stores. And I also wanted to talk about a couple of the really key characteristics of this market that are consistent across all the three different sectors that we talked about. First of all, regarding the technology in this market, the refrigeration systems used are generally field assembled systems, so that the matching of the different main components of the systems and how they're controlled together as a system often has a much bigger impact on the energy performance than any one piece of equipment. So rebates for, one specific item, it doesn't necessarily have the largest impact. And also, because of the importance of those factors, the details of what contractors, designers, and operators do is critical to maximizing the actual operating efficiency of these systems. One other thing that's consistent across these sectors of the market is that there tends to be very few key trade allies that have a large influence within this market, and that includes most notably the installation contractors and service contractors, but also even on a national level, there's very few designers that deal with this market. With those concerns in mind, the team that we had put together looked at utility programs that had been in place both in Minnesota and some programs outside Minnesota. We also reviewed facility and construction data. We did over 60 interviews and did 15 site reviews. And based on that information and some engineering estimates, we looked at the estimated the cost effectiveness and potential increase for more than 25 new measures that we looked at and identified as not being well addressed by the current programs in Minnesota. And with that, I'll hand it over to Melanie Lord from Slipstream.
Great, thanks, Russ. As Russ mentioned, I'm going to talk briefly today about energy efficiency programs for refrigeration facilities and the population of those facilities in Minnesota. So Minnesota's 3 electric investor-owned utilities offer energy efficiency programs with both prescriptive and custom rebates for refrigeration systems. These rebates are offered as part of broader commercial energy efficiency programs. Minnesota's municipal and cooperative utilities also offer rebates for refrigeration equipment. And the programs are promoted primarily through utility account representatives and trade allies. Most of the savings from these programs come from prescriptive rebates, even though custom rebates are available. However, the custom programs require extensive documentation and approvals that often take a considerable amount of time to get. and are seen as too difficult and time-consuming, so both customers and contractors choose not to participate. One of Minnesota's utilities relies on its custom programs to provide refrigeration rebates, while the others focus primarily on their prescriptive offerings. Grocery stores and food manufacturing and cold storage facilities tend to be the most common participants in these prescriptive programs. Few ice arenas take advantage of the utility rebates. So in Minnesota, there are more than 900 grocery stores, more than 200 refrigeration-dominated food manufacturing and cold storage facilities, and 208 indoor ice arenas. Data on the number of facilities primarily came from the U.S. Census Bureau's county business patterns. And according to the 2017 data, which was the most currently available at the time when we began the project, grocery stores account for nearly 70% of the refrigeration-dominated facilities in Minnesota. So in addition to identifying existing facilities, we looked at construction and renovation trends in each sector. New construction and renovation projects provide unique opportunities for building in efficiency at a relatively low incremental cost. We use Dodge construction data to determine these trends. So as you can see, 2017 and 2018 were active years for remodeling in the grocery sector. And 2018 and 2019 also saw some new construction. But renovation and new construction appears to occur in waves in this sector. There is more regularity in new construction and renovation trends in the food manufacturing, cold storage, and ice arenas sector. But all these refrigeration-dominated sectors see relatively few new facilities being built each year. The modest numbers of new facilities compared to existing facilities suggest that utility energy efficiency programs that focus primarily on rebates for new equipment will have limited savings potential. So we took a look at several programs offered in other states that might serve as models for Minnesota. These programs included several comprehensive programs that have food manufacturers or cold storage facilities as common participants. There were 2 programs that specifically targeted grocery stores and 1 serving ice arenas. The comprehensive energy management programs tend to use a targeted approach to recruit participants, often relying on the program implementer's connections to facilities that would be likely candidates. In contrast to Minnesota's programs, they have field staff that work on site with facility staff and identify projects and assist with or complete the paperwork that is submitted for the incentives. One of the programs we looked at targeted grocery stores and was a pilot program and unique in that it used a monitoring strategy to identify efficiency opportunities, but did it from the grocer's perspective. For example, freezer case temperature was monitored rather than electricity use, and then the freezer case temperature was raised as high as possible while keeping the contents frozen to achieve energy savings without product loss, a primary concern for groceries and cold storage facilities generally. Likewise, the municipal ice rink program tailored its approach by customizing the ASHRAE Level 1 audit it provided specifically to ice arenas. While Minnesota utilities have had some success with their refrigeration programs, there is potential to increase their impact with new approaches. So based on our review of programs outside of Minnesota, the project team identified 3 program approaches for maximizing savings. These are frequent outreach to key contractors and industry contacts. A relatively small number of key industry contacts influence the design, operation, and retrofit of refrigeration systems in these facilities. The other 2 approaches are to include opportunities for low-cost operational improvements and cost-effective retrofits in existing facilities. These measures represent about 90% of the additional potential savings for refrigeration-dominated facilities. And finally, streamline custom program processes to reduce the hassle and encourage greater participation. So now I'll turn it over to Jim to discuss the grocery sector in greater detail.
Thanks, Melanie. And yes, I'll dig into the grocery sector findings. What I'm going to cover real briefly here is some basic system characterization, what we found both in our interviews with stakeholders and in our site visits. A little bit about decision makers and their process for planning, and the impact of refrigerant phase outs on upcoming market changes. So turnover in the grocery sector is very slow. As Melanie mentioned, we see here about 1% of construction, of new construction over the last couple of years. And this year we could probably expect no new stores being started. So capturing energy efficiency from codes alone through new construction is really too slow to meet greenhouse gas reduction goals. Therefore, we really need to, when we get a chance to influence new construction, we want to make the greatest changes possible. We want to drive codes and new adoption to get as low as you can, because it's a long time before you get another bite at the apple. So the flip side of that is to achieve real GHG reductions will require an emphasis on retrofits. In existing systems across the state, we primarily see custom design built installations using semi-hermetic compressors, centralized control systems. These are all kind of built up and custom. In Minnesota, air-cooled condensers are predominant, frequently with fixed head pressure control strategies is what we found in our site visits. Those stores are still relying primarily on HCFC and HFC refrigerants, although we're seeing some experimentation with other newer refrigerants. And as long as we have those custom built systems and long piping runs, we're going to have some leaks which contribute to additional greenhouse gas emissions. We do see a lot of opportunities for for doors on multi-deck open cases, and also for LED lights, both in terms of case lighting and area lighting, and opportunities for replacing island cases that still are prevalent and have high loads. In Minnesota, we do see prevalent heat recovering being used on these systems, where we're using hot gas to either preheat domestic hot water, like is shown here, or to as used for space conditioning. So those measures are fairly prevalent in existing stores. The pictures here really summarize what we observed in site visits, that number one, existing stores often have controls that tend to be 15 years old or so. And even with controls of that vintage, they're often underutilized. In the picture here, you can see on the left that even though these controls have the capability to reduce head pressure through floating head pressure control strategy, they're currently controlling to a fixed pressure set point. And we found this common in the facilities that we observed. So to drive greater program results, the feedback that we got that there are a small number of decision makers that are influencing the market. Those folks tend to be risk averse for good reason. They're in charge of public health and safety and delivering food, and also stock on hand is expensive and you don't want to lose it. The interviewees we discussed did have experience with custom incentives, and the feedback was very clearly that we needed to reduce the hassle of custom incentives or take that off their plate to drive greater program participation. Another option would be to apply deemed or quick calc type scaled incentives. The other big market force to pay attention here is refrigerant phase outs. In our interviews with stakeholders, we often found that this quote that there's still a lot of R22 out there, which is not only a greenhouse gas, but ozone depleter. As a member of the U.S. Climate Alliance, Minnesota is committed to greenhouse gas reductions that will likely incorporate the phase out of HFC refrigerants over time. While larger chains have begun to adopt lower GWP options in a few new construction installations, store retrofits will be slow to adopt those changes until they're driven by regulation. Due to Minnesota's climate, transcritical CO2 is likely to be a market leader, although we also heard making use of other strategies such as micro-distributed propane systems that are gaining tractions, especially with chains that have stores in other climates or chains that come from Europe. So when looking at retrofits to lower GWP refrigerants, there are really two pathways that are possible. What I'm labeling here is sort of the mid GWP option and true low GWP options. We can expect that most existing stores will favor the mid GWP options as long as they're able to do so. Those retrofits using some of the newer refrigerants like R448 and 449 can be done without replacing expensive equipment and are characterized as roughly gas-only retrofits. But to achieve truly low GWP systems, such as those using natural refrigerants like CO2, ammonia, or hydrocarbons, require extremely costly retrofits of wholesale system replacements where you would replace compressors, heat rejection, and refrigerated cases. And so the cost of that is going to keep folks from adopting those technologies until they have to. The big short-term opportunities in grocery will likely come from adding doors to open cases, replacing some of those island cases with closed door vertical cases. There's a big opportunity for commissioning existing controls to get the most out of them, replacing LED lighting, both in area and case lighting. And then we also want to look at driving that new construction market through higher efficiency transcritical CO2 options when folks are building new stores. So to summarize, the big take-home opportunities in existing stores are case retrofits, commissioning, and controls. And the other thing to keep on our map is that regulatory trends, especially HFC phase-outs, are going to drive investments. Some of those changes are already occurring. Minnesota is a good opportunity for adoption of CO2 transcritical systems. But when we put in those new systems, we want to make sure that we make them as efficient as possible, because it'll be a long time before we get another crack at those stores. So with that, I'll hand it over to Steve Mulqueen from Cascade Energy to talk about the industrial refrigeration sector.
Thank you, Jim. Here are the findings and recommendations for industrial refrigeration. In the industrial refrigeration sector, large systems are different from smaller systems, not only in size and energy use, but component makeup and complexity. Large refrigeration systems are central systems that are field assembled, while smaller systems are packaged units assembled at the factory. Large systems generally use ammonia as the refrigerant, and packaged units generally use synthetic refrigerants, including R22. Both systems are used to cool and freeze spaces and products. While ammonia is a more efficient refrigerant than R22, conversion of R22 with ammonia is generally too costly for these types of systems. With the phase out of R22, the cost of refrigerant is expected to increase. This may increase major retrofits of R22 in the future, but we did not find any evidence that this trend is occurring now within the industrial refrigeration sector. The phase out of R22 will not impact ammonia refrigeration systems. To better understand trends at the national and local levels, 7 interviews were conducted at the national level and 16 interviews were conducted at the local level. The interviewees were of varying backgrounds and all have extensive knowledge of industrial refrigeration. The interviewees at the national level were more experienced with energy efficiency utility programs. Similar efficiency projects are being done at both the national and local levels, including installation of variable frequency drives and evaporators, compressors and condensers, control upgrades, condensing and suction pressure improvements, and envelope improvements. Interviewees, particularly at the national level, held the tune-up offering in high regard. Tune-ups provide a comprehensive evaluation of energy efficiency opportunities throughout the facility, with emphasis on maximizing the efficiency of the existing equipment, and then providing the customer with a detailed list of cost-effective capital projects with high ROIs. The local interviewees did not specifically mention oil cooling retrofits, but this is likely a result of a limited sample rather than interviewees being unfamiliar with oil cooling retrofits. The payback criteria of energy efficiency projects is about the same at the national and local level, between 2 and 3 years, with a trend towards higher ROIs. The interviewees generally found technical support and rebates provided by utilities beneficial for project implementation. Interviewees exhibited some of the same interest in new technologies at both the national and local levels, including thermal storage, low refrigerant charge package systems, and smart controls. Although the cost of R22 is increasing, the interviewees at both the national and local level displayed no urgency for early retirement of equipment due to the phase out of R22. Low charge ammonia systems can be a good option to replace R22 units. Both the national and local interviewees believe that lowering condensing pressure and tune-ups are good opportunities for the Minnesota market. The national interviewees believe that more awareness of utility offerings and utility involvement from the beginning of the project is needed. The local interviewees, particularly the contractors, indicated that the rebate process is too burdensome for them and their customers. The hassle of dealing with rebate programs is keeping contractors from leveraging rebates and convincing owners to move forward with energy efficiency upgrades as part of the project that would only meet their ROI requirements with the rebate. Instead, projects are being sold on a first cost basis. Live plan and/or site reviews were conducted to better understand the equipment and operations in local facilities. All facilities use ammonia as the refrigerant and all have computerized controls, most of which have highly sophisticated control algorithms. The evaporator fan control was a mix of variable speed and constant speed. All compressors were screw type with a mix of variable speed and slide valve capacity control, and oil cooling was a mix of liquid injection and thermal siphon. All condensers have variable speed control, and 4 of the 5 facilities exhibited opportunities to reduce condensing pressure, but the effort to achieve these savings is beyond mere set point changes. Ammonia refrigeration systems are the dominant system type, both in quantity and energy consumed in the industrial refrigeration sector. Most of refrigeration systems are in existing facilities, as only a few refrigeration facilities are constructed each year. The 3-year statewide program savings potential for existing facilities is estimated at approximately 7.3 gigawatt hours. The largest opportunity is to reduce condensing pressure. Improving controls of evaporator fans, as well as oil cooling retrofits, increasing suction pressure, and improving compressor sequencing all have large energy savings potential. Measures associated with package systems have less overall potential due to the much lower amount of baseline energy use associated with these systems. While lower in magnitude, most facilities have opportunity to reduce energy use through envelope improvements, including high-speed doors and truck seals. We recommend targeting capital, recommissioning, operation, and maintenance savings through detailed on-site assessments. Facilities often have extensive data recording capabilities. This data should be leveraged to make informed recommendations. Programs need to be designed to reduce effort required by customers and contractors. Technical expertise provided by the program is influential, if not essential, for program participation. Using approved tools can expedite common measures such as high-speed doors. Now I'll turn it over to Russ to discuss ice arenas.
Thanks, Steve. I'll start out by highlighting a few things that are different in ice arenas than in the other market segments that were just discussed. First of all, the refrigeration equipment market in existing arenas is kind of a cross between the commercial style of compressor and condenser systems seen in grocery stores and the industrial style of refrigeration equipment that dominates the food processing and cold storage market. There are big differences from arena to arena in the refrigeration equipment types used, and some existing and matching of commercial and industrial system characteristics within the same system. Another key item that is unique to a ice arena is that the refrigeration system cools a secondary fluid that is circulated underneath the ice sheet. In most arenas in Minnesota, that's the ethylene glycol, although some will use calcium chloride brine solution. Another big factor that affects the energy savings and economics of energy improvements is the seasonality of ice rinks. Some of the ice rinks, especially older facilities, might only operate 6 months a year from, say, September or October through March, while other ones, especially newer ones, might operate somewhere between 9 to 12 months a year, with having higher energy savings and better economics for a number of the measures. Also, I'd like to touch on some of the noteworthy trends that we found in the study. First of all, like in the grocery and industrial refrigeration markets, there wasn't any urgency around the phase out of R22, with most facilities looking to wait until equipment was failed. On the other hand, R22 is in some of the refrigeration systems and in ice rinks, there's limited options for doing the drop-in refrigerants because of the use of flooded chillers and some of those. Another trend that we were seeing is that in newer systems, especially those installed within the last 10 years, ammonia has emerged as the more dominant refrigerant in those new systems, it used to be really dominated by R22, but most newer systems are using ammonia. That's definitely not exclusively the case. There are artificial refrigerants that are being used in some of those facilities. In terms of energy efficiency improvements that the people interviewed expressed interest in, there was definitely interest in controls upgrades, and we had seen examples of that. Similarly, they had seen some interest in the use of aqueous ammonia, which is a water ammonia solution, as a secondary fluid. It's something that's just kind of emerging in the United States now, but it uses less pumping energy than the glycol solutions. It's been in use in Sweden for 10 years or so. Also, there are different options for reduced resurface or floodwater treatment, so that the temperature can be reduced instead of using hot water, and when the resurfacing takes place, using much colder water. One item that there's been a lot of discussion in the market in the last several years about is a device called the Real Ice device, and there's been very mixed feedback on that. Some users have had reported good success with that and are very happy with it, and others have heard reports of it being taken out and people being very disappointed. So there's kind of a different amount of skepticism in the market regarding that, and it's an area where we think that there could be more research into that. Now I'd like to focus on the comments that the industry contacts made in regard to utility support for efficiency in ice arenas, and specifically regarding the refrigeration systems. Far and above the most common thing that was reported related to utility programs was the use of variable frequency drives, and we've seen those commonly used either on condenser fans or on glycol pumps, or both. But I'd like to point out that the energy savings associated with those variable frequency drives is often more when they're applied in a refrigeration system than what is typically recognized by those programs that tend to focus on the use more in typical HVAC systems. We also had very limited reports of custom program participation for ice arenas for measures such as low emissivity sealing or reduced flood water temperature for the resurfacing. Other comments related to utility programs, when the interviewees were asked about what could utilities do that they're not doing now, there's definitely a strong theme about making it easier to get rebates for items like controls upgrades or low emissivity ceilings, things that are not dealt with by the prescriptive programs that tend to focus on the grocery store market. There's also an interest in having more outreach both to the contractors themselves and also to the building owners to kind of push those energy efficiency measures and kind of get the discussion and interest going at a higher level. There also was some very specific requests in terms of demonstration sites or evaluations of specific technologies to help answer some questions that some contractors or designers felt weren't really clearly resolved. And there also was an issue brought up regarding the potential for having a third party benefit from a rebate. In the ice arena market, often there might be a city that owns the building, but there might be a different organization that does a lot of the work, either a school district or a hockey association that does a lot of the ongoing operations of the facility. Next slide, please. And now I'm not going to dig into the details of the specific measures, but I did want to note that this chart shows the kind of the achievable 3-year statewide program savings that we think could realistically be achieved for some of the top measures. I did want to note that the top 3 and 4 of these top 7 are related to kind of lower to medium cost control upgrades that can be done on existing facilities in many cases. And none of these items involves replacing any key refrigeration system components. So these are generally things that could be retrofits. And although a number of the things on the middle and bottom of the list might require more substantial capital funding, there also, as I mentioned, there's interest in the use of aqueous ammonia under the ice sheet. I think it also has some potential as a rebate, as a retrofit measure, but there are some concerns regarding material compatibility that should be researched further before there's widespread promotion of that. That kind of wraps up things regarding ice arenas. Now I'm going to jump to summarizing our results overall and our SIP program recommendations. First of all, I'm going to talk about regarding refrigeration energy saving strategies. As I said, we looked at a total of more than 25 different strategies that are not being very well addressed by current programs. And this list here kind of shows by category, as refrigeration efficiency experts tend to look at things. This is kind of a prioritized category listing of where the opportunities are. And with the first being reducing the refrigeration load. If you think of a refrigeration system as having to work to move heat from a low temperature where it's not wanted up to a high temperature where you're going to get rid of it outside. And reducing the refrigeration load really reduces the amount of work that needs to be done to move that heat and get rid of it. Increasing the suction pressure and reducing the head pressure, the next two, both kind of reduce the distance that you have to move that heat uphill across that temperature difference. Increasing the component efficiency is the next to last thing, and there are some opportunities there, and also providing subcooling at the expansion valve kind of effectively reduces the refrigeration load. And the green here kind of highlights where the prescriptive programs are really focused on refrigeration items, and then the yellow is showing where there's some rebates available that generally aren't as focused on refrigeration, but they provide some savings for variable frequency and more efficient motors on fans, although they may not, those rebates tend to not fully capture the energy savings achieved and take credit for the energy savings when those are applied to refrigeration systems. And now the next slide will show kind of what the areas that we focused on in the study of potential growth for existing programs if they branch out and address these other areas more aggressively. So the green is kind of highlighting where we see kind of top priority measures that we recommend programs in Minnesota pursue further. The gray is showing where there's already good effective programs addressing that. And the yellow, the providing subcooling and expansion valve is an area where the cost effectiveness isn't really great, and we kind of recommend that there be further looking into that. For the one opportunity related to that in ice arenas, there's some potential performance issues that should be addressed further before that's really widely promoted. And this is kind of overall kind of summarizing what, like, again, I'm not going to dig into the details of each of the measures, but overall, we identified 14 top priority measures that we recommend utilities in Minnesota do a better job of addressing. And I'd like to note that the majority of those had to do with or things that could be applied to existing facilities without replacing major pieces of equipment. We also recommended further technology evaluation for 9 measures. And I'd like to point out that a number of those measures are specifically related to the transcritical CO2 refrigeration systems for grocery stores that Jim had mentioned earlier, that we're seeing. There appears to be a trend in the local market towards the use of transcritical CO2 systems, and we want to help. We think that utilities should really take a look at getting ahead of the curve on what's coming down the pipe in that area. We also identified 4 lower priority measures that certainly could be included in rebate programs, but they tend to not have as much potential savings and not be quite as cost effective as the top priority measures. And finally, in reviewing recent updates to the Minnesota Energy Code and other federal standards that have developed over the last several years, we noted 16 specific items that would no longer be applicable for rebates as part of new systems because they're essentially required by either a state or federal requirement. And now this is highlighting when we taking a look at the results from each of the individual measures. We combine that with looking at the number of facilities within Minnesota of each of these different types and the amount of activity for new systems. And we looked at kind of what the total potential growth is for refrigeration programs across the state if they would more aggressively pursue these measures. And this is looking, we first looked at the total technical potential if you'd apply these to the number of facilities where they're not in place now. And then we scaled that down dramatically in terms of looking at a fraction of that of what we think could realistically be achieved by a new 3-year SIP program cycle of that would look at each of these areas. And you can see the largest share of savings here is for grocery stores, but there's also significant savings for both industrial and ice arenas. But the biggest takeaway here is that the vast majority of the savings is associated with trying to optimize existing facilities and not just waiting till new systems are put in and trying to make sure that those are the most efficient. There's really a lot of potential savings out there that can be had, and that for comparison purposes right now, all of the existing programs in Minnesota are achieving savings at an amount that's slightly less than the optimizing existing grocery store segment here. So that large blue segment. So if new programs achieved all of the savings that we identified, that would roughly triple the energy savings achieved. And there's relatively little savings related to new systems. And moving on beyond talking about the potential and the specific measures, we developed recommendations related to SIP program approaches that are really critical to better achieve those savings. The 3 areas of this that we really highlighted are frequent outreach to key contacts, also targeting operational and efficiency retrofits, because that's where so much of the of the potential is, and also minimizing barriers for measures that don't have prescriptive rebates at this time. And I'm just going to briefly talk about some of the examples of things within each of these areas. As far as frequent outreach to key industry contacts, the most important things here, I don't want to repeat too much of what Melanie said earlier, but the most important thing is reaching out on regular intervals through personal contacts to key installation and service contractors. They're handling most of the jobs, and getting involved early on in projects can really help influence the energy efficiency of those projects. And they could also be great partners for pushing new projects that might be taken on just for energy efficiency improvements. We also really want to emphasize the importance of working with a number of trade allies, both energy service providers, contractors, designers, and vendors, to develop new program approaches that will be effective at reaching those existing facilities that might not otherwise be doing improvements. It's sometimes easier if someone's already doing a project to kind of tack on a little bit of an efficiency update to that, but there's so much potential savings by optimizing the existing facilities, even outside of them doing major retrofits. And now in terms of targeting operational efficiency and retrofits, as I said, that's really another key area because there's so much of the potential there, and some of the strategies that can be used to accomplish that have been done elsewhere are having a refrigeration expert work on site with the technicians, either from a refrigeration service contractor or, in the case of industrial refrigeration sites, they might have their own technicians that are capable of making some adjustments and optimization, doing some optimization. Also providing reduced cost assessments. And there are definitely some differences between the different sectors of the market, between grocery and industrial and ice arenas. So having someone involved that has expertise for that particular type of facility is often important to really get the contractors on board and get everyone on board and to get the most savings. There's also, as Steve had mentioned, there's really opportunities for leveraging remote monitoring to reach more facilities in a more cost-effective manner, and also often to provide more effective recommendations based on looking at what's happening with the systems over time, because a lot of the efficiency opportunities are related to how the controls respond to different operating conditions. And that's something that a one-time on-site snapshot doesn't fully capture. There's also opportunities for operator workshops, especially related to industrial refrigeration facilities. And the last key recommendation that we had is talking about minimizing barriers for measures without prescriptive rebates. The first most important thing that can be done is to try to develop more prescriptive rebates for items that there currently are not rebates for now, where there's big potential. That would just really could go a long ways to reducing barriers for participation. Also, trying to shift the burden for the custom analysis from the customers and contractors to the utilities and program implementers as much as possible. One utility in Minnesota that has really done this has achieved much higher savings than the other utilities if you look at their achievements on a per capita basis. Now, in the interest of time, I think we'll go to the last kind of summary slide here. The final report has more details on all of these items. Just to briefly summarize the key kind of takeaways as we see it from the study is that the field assembly of systems and the market dominance of a few key trade allies really makes this market different from a lot of markets, and it's something that really needs to be paid attention to try to get effective results in this market and to fully achieve the potential savings. We identified more than 25 refrigeration system efficiency measures that have not been very well addressed to date in Minnesota. And in focusing on these, we see a 3-year potential for increase in program savings. So this is on top of what programs are already doing on the order of about 26,000 megawatt hours. And the vast majority of that savings is for optimizing existing systems. With that, I'll turn it back over to I believe, to Laura for the questions.
Yeah, thanks for that great presentation, all of you. If you have not already done so, please take time to type additional questions into the Q&A box and send them to all panelists. Laura, do you have questions for anyone on the research team?
Sure, we do have a few questions. First question, just a couple of broad questions about the context of the report. So did this research concentrate on the whole state of Minnesota or just the Twin Cities area? And then also you could talk briefly about why you didn't include breweries and bottling companies or convenience stores.
We focused on the whole state of Minnesota, and we have in the final report we have kind of documented how many facilities there are within the different utility service territories throughout the state, and that's broken down by facility type. And when we talk to key trade allies from that affect the market throughout the state, and breweries and bottling companies we didn't include because they tend to have different packages of equipment, different players in that market than these other segments, and tend to not have quite as much of the same opportunities. And the other item was convenience stores. They tend to they don't have the same large field assembled system, so they have very different opportunities there, and also it tends to be a different set of contractors dealing with those facilities.
All right, thanks. How confident are you that the data from the interviews is a good representation of each industry segment?
We feel that we have got a really good feel for it. We talked to the majority of the key players in each of those areas in terms of especially the contractors have such a big influence. We talked to the vast majority of the large contractors that have a big influence in the state, and we also talked to the vast majority of retail chains.
Great. Regarding R22 refrigerant and customers not concerned about the phase out, is that because customers are stockpiling R22 refrigerant?
That's something we've been hearing. It's a combination of customers and contractors that there's enough refrigerant available on the market. For example, we've had, for examples, customers that might have multiple sites. I've heard stories of them, as they change out one site, then they will save that R22 for servicing their other facilities. So we have seen some of that, but I believe there's also availability through contractors. I don't know if Jim or Steve wants to add more to that.
Yeah, this is Jim. I don't see folks kind of doing wholesale stockpiling. There may be a few refrigerant dealers that are putting some aside, but it's kind of a short-term strategy. And as far as commodities go, just the space to store it versus how much they can get for it. I think it's kind of on the margins. So that'll get folks by for a while, but I don't think that'll have a long-term impact on the market.
All right, thank you. Regarding recommendations and the recommendation to develop prescriptive rebates, somebody asked, which prescriptive rebates do you think should be added first? Perhaps the top three.
That's a tough question.
Yeah.
I'd say in grocery, I'd target doors. Do we have prescriptive doors? It's
yeah.
sorry,
There is some rebates, prescriptive rebates for doors already. But certainly, I'd say control item measures, although those are kind of hard to define in some cases. But one thing that we've kind of seen across all sectors is measures to reduce the head pressure. I know specific to ice arenas, low emissivity ceilings is a good target. I think for industrial facilities, we had, I think Steve before had mentioned moving away from liquid injection oil cooling through thermal siphon oil cooling or some other option. Jim or Steve, if you have other comments.
I guess my comment for the industrial is a lot of custom types systems, mainly custom type systems, and those generally require a custom type analysis. But there's measures such as the doors that can benefit from tools that are able to turn around projects much quicker than if the analysis is redone every time. Yeah,
some of these things are kind of tricky because even though you apply the same principle, say for such as you're reducing the head pressure or raising the suction pressure, when you go from facility to facility, the amount of how much it costs to make those changes and to what degree you can make a change varies a lot. So that, there could potentially, I could imagine kind of some sliding scale of saying it could potentially be simplified if you say, okay, if you raise the suction pressure by or saturated suction temperature by every 2 degrees, you get a rebate up to this amount, you get so much savings, and then maybe cap that off with a as a percentage of the project cost might be a way to kind of go in between a typical prescriptive rebate and a fully custom rebate to try to make it more easier for doing the calculations and to determine a rebate amount and not have to go through a long pre-approval process and developing custom calculations for each project.
All right, thank you. All right, well, that's about it for the questions. Except we just got one question about whether the report's available. So I'll turn it over to Mary Sue to wrap up and just touch on that real quick.
Great. Thanks, Laura. And thank you all for your great presentation. Again, if you have follow-up questions about this card project, feel free to contact one of us. The recording of the webinar and the slide set will be available on the department's website at a later date, and the final report will probably be available in a couple of months. When available, you can link to either of these from the quick links on our Applied Research and Development webpage, as indicated on this slide. The link for that webpage is at the bottom of this slide, and there's other resources there on the webpage that you might want to check out. Thanks for participating. We appreciate your interest. Before we go, I want to mention another upcoming webinar, which is on January 21st. 2050 partners will be discussing results from an 18-month process to develop a roadmap for our Minnesota Codes and Standards program. You can keep abreast of upcoming webinars and other news related to the Minnesota SIP program by signing up for SIP updates in our email list. You can use the link on this page to sign up for that. In the meantime, contact me if you have any questions or suggestions for the CARD program. I also want to remind you that there'll be a short evaluation that launches after this webinar. Please take a few minutes to fill it out and let us know how we did today.